Can you guys hear me? Perfect. So when you drive with your car over the highway, how many of you guys have a little bit of a feeling for what's the energy consumption you have with that car per 100 kilometers? Raise your arm if you have a bit of a feeling how much energy you consume. Yeah? All of you? Almost? Now, do you have that same level of transparency in the building that you work in? Do you know how much energy is consumed there? I think most of us do not have that. And that's surprising because buildings consume 40% of the global energy. So there's a lot of reasons to care, not just for us individually, our cost, but also for the environment and the society. Now let's go back to the car example. If I drive very fast, or for example here the German Autobahn, I know what is the implication for my car. It consumes way more energy, and if I drive slower, I consume less energy on the same distance. Now, in your office building, do you have that same level of transparency? Do you know, for example, in the winter, if I reduce the temperature from 22.5 degree to 21.5 degree, how much energy I will save on that day? Or let's say you have the heating on and you open the windows, do you get an understanding how much energy that costs you, that fresh air that you bring into the building? Most of us don't have that. So there's a lot of transparency missing for us in buildings that we are so well known to in many other places where also a lot of energy is consumed. And this is something that I would like to talk with you guys today about. What's the challenge behind that and what can we do about it? How can we address this? Now, when I was in France, we did a field study. We tried to understand what are the main reasons for big energy inefficiencies. And you know what was one of the key factors that was identified? Heating and cooling were running at the same time. Now that's an interesting battle if you think about it. Someone in the winter, in the shift to the summer, forgot to turn off the heating and then they started to turn on the cooling. And eventually, over months, people were just running the heating system at the base and the cooling system on the top, and they would compete. And obviously, on this one, no one's gonna win. So you see, it's not the foundational, complicated topics that often consume a lot of energy. It's behavioral, and it's also as subtle as, you basically keep a heating and a cooling system on. Now, this is of course not true for all buildings. You know, there's lots of energy efficient buildings, LEED certified buildings, modern airports, hospitals, universities, buildings we see in the media and marketing, and obviously we get better and better with this. But are we good enough? Now, if you ask the European Union, they say 75% of all commercial buildings are massively energy inefficient. Oftentimes it's not just 2-3%, often it's 10, 15, 20%. So what can we do about it? What is there to change? We talked a lot about insulation in the past and improving the building shell, and that's been great. And we also talked a lot about equipment efficiency. And we've come a long way, but what hasn't really been talked about so much is how do I actually control a building correctly? How do I get rid of the things that I described in the beginning of my presentation? And when I say building management, for me it starts with, does a building even have the basic software to run that building, to give that transparency and understanding? And from our understanding, 80% of all commercial buildings do not have building management software. And that comes along with a lot of implications. If you don't have building management software in place, you have no view on the health of your HVAC system. Is it running correctly or does it have an issue? And if it has an issue, we know it. Sometimes it stays in the basement for many weeks and months. It just consumes more energy and eventually it's going to break. So you have more energy cost and you have more maintenance cost. And without the transparency, that just happens. Another one is you have no easy view on energy. Yeah, you get a monthly bill or quarterly, an annual energy bill. But do you really know how much energy you consumed on what day? Do you know where you consumed it in the building? How many buildings have that basic transparency like you would expect it also in your car? Now, we talked about end user engagement a little bit when driving the car faster or slower and through this deciding how much energy it consumes. Now, in the building, if I don't have the basic transparency of how much energy I consume today and what did my comfort level and the performance level of the building imply on this, how can we also behave differently? If I don't know how much I can save, then why would I change my behavior? So without this continuous feedback, behavior doesn't change and therefore energy is being wasted. And ultimately, it's also about connectivity, because when we talk about these other 80% of buildings without a BMS, they're often the smaller buildings. They don't have a facility manager 24/7 that can look into the building continuously. So how do you get still someone to look at the building with a good amount of knowledge? Remote connectivity here is key. Now, the good news is all of these buildings have HVAC equipment. And I'm going to show you a little bit in a little bit why we can take this as a foundation to change something. Now, I ask myself, who can equip these other 80% of buildings with a building management software? And the first thing that came to my mind, also coming from Siemens, was it could be the BAS players. Those companies have equipped the first 20% of buildings with the BMS. Why wouldn't they go for the other 80%? The good news is they have the technology. The bad news is it's often too complicated, the way it's designed, and those companies haven't traditionally been in those buildings. Then I was thinking, so who is in those buildings? And I came up with the electrical players. Every building has an electrical cabinet. So they are in the building. The bad news is they lack the HVAC know-how, and they also don't have the technology in place. And then the third one that came to my mind is you guys, the HVAC equipment companies. You are in all those buildings with your equipment. Also the ones without a BMS. You have the knowledge about HVAC, which is the biggest consumer of energy in the building. What you're missing is the technology. And this is where the company that I work for, J2 Innovations, can help you with the foundational technology to get into that space. Now, what does such a BMS technology need to look like? I already said that the classical BMS doesn't work here. It's too complicated. It's also too complicated because who is in those buildings? It's the installer who brought the equipment. The installer has the service contract, keeps the relationship with the building owner or the facility manager. The installer is the perfect person to bring the BMS into the building, but the installer doesn't want to do complex integrations. The installer wants to do something more simple, more plug and play. So it needs to move from spaghetti integration to plug and play. That's key in engineering. And in the operation, it's also not always the sophisticated facility manager who is trained on this. It's maybe the math teacher who between his one and his other class also happens to manage the building. So in operation, it needs to be more dashboard oriented. Does my building have a problem? How can I fix it? Who could I even call? Is my building running energy efficient? If not, what are the things that I could change to do that? So way simpler operations and way simpler engineering. Now, what we've developed with J2 is a foundational technology called Fin Framework that serves as a building management software also in the very complicated buildings. We've equipped airports, we've equipped universities, we've equipped hospitals, but we've focused more on the smaller buildings. And in our collaboration with some of the leading HVAC equipment companies, we've actually worked with them to take our technology, make it custom, also fit it well with the equipment of those players, and bring it as a plant management and building management software into the space. With two key focus areas. One is to somehow create an island of peace for the equipment. Where do I find all the data about my equipment to also perfectly perform my service? But also, how can I do exactly what we've talked about before, grow also the simpler buildings into building management software. And you see it here, it's Cleveland, one of our long-standing partners, Lennox, Panasonic, and Flag Group that have utilized our technology and together with us created their own products. So you also see it here with the UIs of these different companies. They all look different because they all have a little bit of a different need, but they all follow the same theme, that there's an understanding that the equipment companies can grow into the software space, and we would like to help you in doing that with our foundational technology. Now, as you've maybe noticed from J2 Innovations being a Siemens company, we are also collaborating now with our mother company, Siemens. So you can buy the technology from us, J2, and we have our stand here in Hall 4. But we share it today, tomorrow, and the day after with Siemens, because Siemens is also utilizing our technology and bringing it together with the Climatics controls portfolio that they offer to equipment OEMs and the Climatics cloud portfolio. So, in a nutshell, I believe that there's an incredible opportunity to do something here for the other 80% of buildings that do not have a building management software. I think that the HVAC equipment companies are in a prime position to grow into this space. And I see J2 with the Fin framework as a very good foundational technology to bring you to that level. And I would encourage you, come to Hall 5, visit J2 and Siemens, and let's talk about it. And if you also have questions here today now, I would be happy to take them. So thank you. Any questions?
No, but the building,
Say again?
what
Yes.
comes under building it.
It's so the question is if it comes under Building X? No, it's on the edge. It runs totally on the edge. It's not a cloud product, and it runs in controllers of different kinds. Siemens controllers, other controllers of other parties.
Like, interesting.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any more questions? Good, then thank you for being here today. Thanks.